good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are joining us from. Thank you so much for joining this Research to Action session on learning and youth-led action in Africa. My name is Juliana Makonise, and I'm an advocate for economic equity and inclusive global policies. I will be a moderator for today. Today's discussion is a continuation from yesterday's knowledge sharing session. And the key points from yesterday's discussion were on the development of inclusive public policies, prioritization of youth in decision-making processes, and the channeling of more investment towards access to quality education for all. The structure for today's session will be in the form of a fishbowl discussion. This will provide an interactive opportunity for youth to engage with policymakers from the region and ensure that they have a dialogue on the research findings that have been developed through UNESCO. Selected youth are going to enter the fishbowl discussion. They'll ask a couple of questions and then the discussion will resume from there. If you would like to address a particular question or join the discussion, please ensure that you include your name and your question in the chat box, and then we'll have you have the spotlight to ask your question. So without wasting much of our time, we're now going to have our speakers introduce themselves and we'll then jump into the main business for today. So our first panelist for today is Elvis YAR, the Knowledge Management Associate from the African Union Commission. Elvis.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you very much, everyone on this call. It's a pleasure to be with you as young people meet and exchange ideas on how to improve on our research that we are using to advocate for policy implementation. If I'm introducing myself, my name is Elvis. I'm a Knowledge Management Associate at African Union Commission. I've also done a lot of research since the beginning of this COVID till now. And I am glad to be with you today to also contribute to the discussions. Therefore, let me hand over back to Juliana.
Thank you very much for that, and it's good to have you here. We're now going to have Ms. Ngozika Amonson from the Federal Ministry of Education in Nigeria.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ngozi Emerson from Federal Ministry of Education, Department of Planning, Research and Development. I am a real advocate of proper policy research and implementation in the region.
Thank you very much for that. And we'll now have our third panelist. This is Njimasal Oliver from the Head of Service of Social Educational Activities and Youth Associations from the Ministry of Youth, Sport, and the Promotion of Youth Entrepreneurship in Chad. Can we please have P.T. Ndlovu at this moment?
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Since we're linking up from different time zones, I hope I've covered all of them. I'm P.T. Ndlovu. I'm a Senior Youth Development Officer at the Ministry of Youth, Sport and Arts, the Republic of Zambia. I participate in youth policy making. Yeah, in short, that's it. I'm happy to be part of this interactive session and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And we'll now have our last panelist, who is Dr. Abdul Lamin, the Senior Policy and Program Specialist at the UNESCO Social and Human Sciences sector.
Well, thank you very much, Juliana. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. My name is Abdul Lamin. I'm joining you from UNESCO headquarters in Paris, where I'm based as a program specialist in the social and human sciences sector. I specifically work in the youth team Part of my responsibility, among others, is to support national governments in developing inclusive national youth policies and supporting young people, helping build their capacities. I like to regard myself as a youth man, so I'm very happy to be here to engage with the young people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And it's so good to have you here, all of you really. And I do believe that this is going to be a very interactive discussion where we'll learn a lot about how to ensure that we develop inclusive policies that have young people within the center of those policies. So thank you so much for availing your time to join this discussion. So at this point, we're going to start our fishbowl discussion. And this is a discussion that is going to allow young people to enter into the circle of speakers and ask them random questions which they have already developed. So if you're part of the guests who are here and you also want to be part of this discussion, please ensure that you write your name and your question in the chat. And soon after that, or when we have more time, we'll be able to give you a platform to join that particular discussion. So don't forget your name and your question in the chat. Thank you very much for that. So we're going to start off with our first young person who is going to get into the discussion and let us know about his or her thoughts about the topic at hand. I'll call upon Zola Ndonita. Can we now have Max Amanu? Max?
Thank you, Juliana, for this time. Just a small inquiry. I have prepared 4 questions. Will I take them all at once, or it will be a rotational basis?
Well, I think for now you can ask the first question and then we get a response and then we'll move from there.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Max Amanu. I am from Uganda, and I am the research lead for Southern and Eastern African team in this YAR project. Our research topic is around learning and COVID-19, and we are trying to investigate the impact of COVID-19 on the lives of the young people in African continent. So much as our team is, the team members are from Southern and Eastern African region, we are addressing the education sector in general in the whole African continent. So I feel like putting that forward. So the first question I have for my amazing panelists is that our research finding shows that 3 out of 4 students did not have access to the relevant curriculum for them to transition to online learning. And this is simply because of lack of this not being available explicitly in learning institutions in African continent. So our team suggests that learning institutions of learning should update their websites with this information readily available, including the course units and the reading materials, so that when something like this happens or the hybrid learning continues in place, students can be able to easily transition and follow through when it's standardized. However, I am trying to inquire how best, can this be pushed to be implemented as soon as possible, because the online learning is still ongoing and then it's not that very standardized, because people are trying to find where to read, what to read, how to read, and also how long do they need to read for that particular course. So they're just doing it randomly without having any standard format. And I was wondering how best can we push this recommendation forward to be implemented as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. Any one of the panelists can respond to the question.
Juliana, can I take one?
Yes, that's okay.
Okay, Max, thank you for the very good job you and your team did. I'm just looking at what you did, and I do not know how you arrived at the conclusion of your research. You said it's a research. Is it I don't know if it was a desktop research or it was by a survey or it was by maybe primary data collection that you arrived at this solution. But my suggestion is that the first is to make sure that you tackle this, especially at ministry level. The Ministry of Education, if the methodology that you use to conduct this research, use this methodology and present it in a report format to the ministry. When you present it to the ministry, the officer in charge of education at the ministry, or the minister in charge of education, will therefore take this up, because the curriculum is very, very important. If the curriculum is not on the same level as what is supposed to be taught in the schools, then there is a gap. Then, I always look at education in three areas: the enrollment rate, the passing rate, and how many people are, both men and women, and I look at the male and the female side. So please try and present your report and adding the methodology to the ministry, and if possible, in your recommendations to the ministry, if possible, indulge the ministry or include them and actually call for a roundtable discussion or a meeting with the ministry. One challenge is that sometimes researchers we face in implementing our policy actions and recommendations, from my experience over the years, is sometimes that we do not do effective follow-up. So the monitoring side, we fall on it. So the best thing, you sit with your ministry that is in charge of education, have a roundtable discussion, come up with a roadmap that you intend to go about it to ensure its full implementation. Once you have your methodology well defined in your reports, whoever you submit the report to will actually understand the recommendations, and it highlights the gap and what is actually supposed to be dealt with. So the best point of contact in terms of a curriculum is to target it at the macro level, and that is the ministry. Thank you very much, and over to you, Juliana.
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive response. I don't know if Max, you have something to comment on that based on the questions that were raised.
Yes, sure, I do. In terms of the methodology, we did, just like almost all other YAR teams, we did a desk survey, online research through a survey, and where we reached out to respondents because of the safety of, because this research happened started way back in 2020 when the pandemic was at its peak. Though it's still ongoing, we needed to make sure that much as we are pushing for solutions, there's also need for safety of the research team and also the respondents. So that's why we opted for purely online qualitative research targeting youth between the age of 18 and 35 who have studied in African institutions during like a year back before COVID and during COVID-19 period itself. So maybe just to make a little clarification that the curriculum exists, especially for these institutions to get accredited. They already have provided some sort of framework or some sort of curriculum which is aligning with the Ministry of Education. However, this information sits with the administration, the universities. It's in a hard copy, I can say. So because I remember, even I can relate with this, even when I was way back at the university, they used to pin it at the university, and then for you go and copy that, okay, this is what I need and did. But now when this shock came and schools were closed, and universities for some reason went still to continue with trying to push and learning online, And now that's where the problem came from, that the information is not accessible, just like other universities from, like, say, for example, the developed countries like Europe and North America. You can easily browse through and find, okay, this is the reading material I need, this is how long I need to read for it, and probably these are the possible subject areas and even the subdivisions. However, because of maybe the low level of digitalization in the continent, that had not happened before the pandemic in the African university. That was the discovery. So now we are trying to push for it so that in case the hybrid learning continues, or perhaps purely online learning at some point again comes, this information needs to be found easily, so that the transition is easy and also uniform for everybody to understand how to go about it. So that was sort of like trying to make like a clarification on what I'm trying to say. So however, this to be taken on to universities, for example, who have direct control over their systems, is the mechanism I'm looking for, like how easily and how best can this information be, pushed to these people, not necessarily pushed, but given to these people to act on it as soon as possible, because the online learning is still ongoing. So if, for example, in Uganda, the lockdown has been there for forever, like up to now. The schools are not open up to next year. So, and yet still the action regarding this has not been done. So it was relating when the findings came out from the respondents, it was relating to what's going on, even in my own country. So I could relate with the findings and be like, okay, this needs to be acted upon, both by private universities and public universities, because I see like when we try to push it at the government level, it will be more leaning towards the public universities, and then private institutions will somehow, will not be that much pushed to act. However, and that's why I'm here, I'm like, how best can this information, be, or this recommendation be tabled to the institutions of higher learning in the entire African continent to act on it accordingly.
Thank you very much for that, Max. And I think that's a very comprehensive research that was done, and would really love to learn more about it in the coming future. So for now, I think you can go ahead with your second question. Just make it short so that we go to the next speakers worthy.
Thank you. The second question is that the findings still indicate that only 13% of the students from the rural areas were able to study online during the pandemic. And when I say during the pandemic is still ongoing, but of course, as per the time the study was made, all the data was collected, it was only 13%. That's a very, very small margin of the number. And some of the parameters surrounding the reasons for this is limited access to internet, and also even those who could have access to internet is not that stable and reliable for you to last long in the call or in the online class. So to prevent the further inequality and exclusion of access to education in this particular regard for students from the rural areas, not to be able to even able to learn for a whole year or plus, we are suggesting that, or we have a recommendation that there should be a mechanism of having internet access in rural setting, stable and reliable internet access, because it's not only just having internet there, but like, is it the same strength like in the urban areas, or is it, can it be able to make them do that? So for us to do it, we are wondering how best, students from low and rural income areas can have stable, reliable, and affordable internet in this regard. Thank you.
Yeah, can I take that?
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Max. And first, let me commend you and your colleagues for an excellent job. I think you have laid the foundation for responding to many of the issues that were already there, but have already been exacerbated by the pandemic. And I think to the extent that you talk about the inequality, the rural-urban divide, this was always an issue. I think what the pandemic has done is to really bring it to the fore and really raise the urgency of the situation and the need to respond and respond in a very comprehensive way if we are going to attain the UN goals of leaving no one behind, and if we are going to build back better. We keep hearing about governments talking about building back better after the pandemic and so forth. Now, on the issue of the digital divide, which is a phenomenon that we see across the world, both the rich countries and the countries that are not so much well-resourced, and even within countries, the statistics that you just quoted from your study, which suggests that only about 13% of people in the rural areas were able to access some kind of online learning. It's very alarming. Of course, if we are going to transition to digital education, which is really the way we are going, it is not going to happen overnight. So therefore, my suggestion would be, as you engage policymakers and other partners who will be looking at some of these recommendations, is to see how we respond in a short-term way, and then how governments can address this from a long-term perspective. I know, for instance, in some of the countries in Africa, with the outbreak of the pandemic, the use of traditional forms of media was one way that education was brought down to the rural areas. Radio, for instance, as you very well know, in Uganda and in the region across, radio is one of the most accessible means of getting information by many people across the respective countries. And I do know a number of countries in Africa and elsewhere were able to use radio as a means of reaching out to especially rural communities that did not even have access to electricity, let alone internet connectivity. So I think in the short term, we need to look at some of those cases where I think there were fairly some amount. There's fairly some amount of success. I mean, I can give you the example of Sierra Leone, for instance, where they used radio to reach people in the rural areas, and I think there are some very good lessons there that other countries can build on. So, in the short term, that could be one strategy to reach people in rural communities. But in the long term, we definitely, as you correctly said, have to transition to digital learning, which means that there has to be a much more broader developmental approach to dealing with this situation. The issue of energy, I mean, this is related to some of the challenges that were raised in your findings. Even where people have access to internet, electricity is not a reliable means, it's not reliable in many countries. And so the whole issue of energy, access to energy, is going to be very key. So I think from a long-term perspective, one of the advice I would pose is, as you formulate these recommendations, which the policymakers are going to engage in, it will be interesting if you could link that to the national development priorities, many of which are already linked to some of the global goals, the sustainable development goals, energy for all, and all of that stuff. In a nutshell, what I'm really saying is that if we are going to reach everybody, particularly in the rural communities, we may want to explore traditional forms of media and communication, radio, television, where it is possible, so that young people who are not able to access education as the pandemic continues to unfold are able to do so. But in the long term, there has to be a complete reform of the whole digital landscape so that we have the necessary kind of infrastructure to be able to have access to education. I'm also aware that UNESCO's International Institute for Capacity Building in Africa, ICBA, was able to set up a platform, at the start of the pandemic that countries were able to benefit from some kind of training. I think one of the issues that came out in your recommendations was also the fact that even in cases where countries had access to e-learning, there was a need to capacitate teachers, to enhance their capacity to use that tool. And so I think moving forward, the lessons from the experience of ICBA and trying to upscale that and sort of institutionalize it moving forward will be very key. So let me stop there for now. And I'm happy to come back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that was a very well-detailed response to the question that had been asked. And I think one of the key things to just remember from this is that we need to actually utilize the resources that we already have to tackle the short-term effects of the certain problems that we have. And we had from Dr. Abdul that it's important that we also learn from other countries, from other organizations who are doing it well. So that's something we really need to consider as we work towards building back better. So thank you very much for that. At this point, we'll move a bit to our next speaker, and we'll have a question from Akwasi Sapong from Ghana. And this is the founder and executive director from Alterleaf Foundation. Akwasi, if you can just unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
All right. So we're having a bit of a challenge.
Thank you much for the opportunity. And I have these questions to our panelists. My first question is that in this, where the panelists are coming, is there any national action plan on the safety and the protection for young people or young learners with disability to protect their safety in emergency situations like COVID-19? The second part is that if it exists, are they willing to collaborate with youth with disability and youth organizations to develop such action plan? Then I also would like to know, COVID-19 has shown us one important thing, and that is the need to roll a national digital skills strategy. I would like to know the views of panelists on the need to roll a national digital strategy in African countries so that we do away with the scattered different digital programs that are not coordinated. In my country, where I come from in Ghana, we have that problem. We don't have a national digital strategy for youth so that learning never stops for young people, so that it can also promote youth innovation and bring about increased youth employment. I'm saying this at the back of even the 2020 Global Education Monitoring Report which focus on all means all, very often it doesn't mean so. So these are the very first 3 questions I would like to put forward. How they can be able to help, which are all some of the indications from the various studies that have been done by researchers by young people, including my organization, which is based in Ghana, as well as in the COVID period. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Akwasi, for that. And I think the panelists can tackle this particular question. And we can start with Ms. Ngozika Emanson, if you'd like to answer some of the questions that have been asked.
Juliana, thank you very much. I would like to call attention to digital learning in Africa. Really, from the onset, we have a lot of problems to tackle when it comes to education and ICT. As a result of 1, access to internet, 2, you have the manpower development and the terrain of the rural areas inaccessible to even regular teachers. As a result of this, from the beginning of 2020, when the pandemic started, the schools faced a lot of problems, but they have to go home, and then there was total lockdown in the nations, not only in Nigeria here. When it comes to digital education, we knew that from that time there was nothing we could do, but thank God there were responses to look at the situation and see how to bring education on board. So some agencies tried, the Ministry of Education tried in getting some online classes. Unfortunately, they could only reach those in the urban or the cities. But if we are going to go into digital education, of course, it has to be a long-term plan where the government has to budget for it and come up with a national policy, which will look at the curriculum, the size of the curriculum itself, standardize it, and if possible, come out with a curriculum that will be digital friendly and not over bloated, so that the learner can easily learn and pass the prescribed examinations, because that is the actual outcome of learning. If we are going to do this, then we are also going to recognize the physically challenged or those who are not able, because they should be our priority. We cannot leave them without learning. A lot of them has been excelling in their own field of academics. So in order to empower them and make them useful to the society and to themselves, there is need to recognize them. And all this will come under the umbrella of national planning and policy development, which will have to be embarked on by every government of a particular nation so that it can serve their purpose. So it is not going to be very easy, but it is not going to be impossible. It is something that Africa can achieve if the governments set their mind to it. And I believe they have started. Like in Nigeria here, we have some policies coming on board to take care of digital learning, to take care of the security of the physically challenged. So when another problem I would like to address, which he raised, is if the government have a national action plan. Of course, with what we have seen, every government has come out with a national action plan. But remember, it will require a lot of resources. And I believe as the UNESCO has taken the lead, as we can see, in researching and bringing young people on board, when these recommendations are presented to the government, I believe that will make them hasten their plans and bring it on board. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gwazika, for that. And I believe that this comes back to the issue of investments. We really need to ensure that we channel more investments towards infrastructural development and even the implementation of all these national action plans. So, Petit, would you also like to respond to the questions?
Yes, please. I would want to add, thank you so much for that input. It's really almost similar to what we are doing as a country. Just to add, not so long ago, our government introduced ICT as a policy to be implemented, ICT learning in all schools. But I guess this came, it has not yet really, we have not really built so much infrastructure in the rural areas, but in the urban areas, at least most institutions have internet access. So it came at COVID came at a time when we have not yet really invested substantial in that area. But as Zambia, it's one of our policies to ensure that all schools and all institutions have ICT facilities. And so government is also working on building infrastructure to help improve in that area. So as young people, possibly you could try to lobby through various national policies. Like most of the recommendations that you've come up with are really good, and they should be able to help us as policymakers make recommendations to our various institutions so that most of these recommendations can be put in our national policies and we be able to implement, so that in future, or as now, as we're still in the COVID pandemic, most of our learners can be able to access learning materials, especially those in the rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I think that's a very good example from Zambia to actually show that these policies, these national action plans can actually come to pass if we mobilize more resources towards such developments. Thank you very much. And Alvis, you can also share your input.
Thank you very much, Juliana, and thank you, colleagues, for the wonderful contribution. As we are looking at improving upon infrastructure to make sure that education become accessible to every young people across the continent, one of the things that I've always been advocating for is that we are the young people, we have the power. Let's tell the leaders what we want. At the African Union, this is one of the nice initiatives that we are coming up with and we are rolling out is to force government and to speak to governments that please try and improve on virtual learning, because now, because of COVID, you cannot have the physical interactions again. Life is not going to be normal again. So one of the things we are, the African Union has been promoting or has been advocating for with governments and member states is on the virtual learning. One thing I've also seen is that let's advocate for internet to be extended and electricity to be extended. But however, there are some areas electricity and there are some areas that they can also use their national, their community radio. So I've been advocating that why don't we use the national TV stations if there is electricity? Why don't we use the national TV stations to conduct education session, so we can dedicate a week for maybe senior high schools, a week for junior high schools, and a week for universities, so that they will be taken through series of courses through using the national TV. It will be a bit challenging, but at least if we have teachers and who come on national TV to use this platform to be able to educate young people, by the time young people resume from their break and get back to school, at least they've covered a little bit of the syllabus via the national TV learning. And I believe that this will go a long way to also bridge the gap as we are waiting for the long-term investment that is to expand electricity and internet access. This is the best way forward.
Thank you very much for that. And it goes back to what Dr. Abdul was talking about on how we should actually utilize the resources that we already have so that we actually solve these problems in the short term as we work towards the long-term solutions to these problems that have been brought up by the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you very much. Akwasi, I see your hand raised. You can ask your question or comment on the responses that have been given.
Thank you very much. And I'm very grateful for the commitment being shown. Yes, one of it, I was very specific. It has to do with a national action plan that seeks to protect learners with disability. So it's not the overall national action plan on COVID, but a national action plan that focuses on learners with disability in emergency situation. I think it's important that policymakers look at it, and with the young people, because we did a lot of work, a lot of research in Ghana in that area, and the results we found were very humiliating. And that made us to undertake a lot of activities that helped the situation. My last question is that I would like to know the views of panelists based on the evidence from COVID and the impact. Would they be willing to ensure that in their countries and the African Union as well and UNESCO, that mental health is introduced in schools from the elementary level to the senior high school, that mental health is introduced? When I say mental health, I'm talking about developing checklists on mental health for young people, learners in schools, so that they become aware of it at a very early age. Would they be willing to spearhead this process in their country? And African Union, would they be willing to table this as an agenda in the next Heads of Member State meeting? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question, Dr. Abdul. If you'd like to address this question.
Yes, thank you. Just before I address the question on mental health, allow me to just emphasize a point that was made about the whole transformation of the digital landscape so that it is much more responsive to the educational needs of our young people. I think one of the challenges that, and we have to be also frank sometimes in these conversations, I'm happy we have some of our colleagues from government who are here. So it's good that we have a frank discussion. One of the challenges that the continent faces in many cases is the disconnect between the good intentions, and implementation. Now, excellent recommendations have come out of the research findings from the young people. But for this to happen, for us to translate these into real action that begins to really change, the landscape, I think we really have to be a little bit more strategic. And therefore, I would like to say, as much as it is good for us to say we need to transform the infrastructure when it comes to internet connectivity, energy access to all, but we need to also see COVID as an opportunity to address not only the current situation that we face, but future ones that may come in the short term and in the long term. And how do we do that strategically? It means that at the national level, at the regional level, the young people have to lead the way in building what I would call a broad-based constituency that will advocate for a complete transformation of the policy landscape. If we are going to institutionalize a pedagogical approach that incorporates e-learning into teacher training, it means the policy response has to come from putting in place the necessary policies, ensuring that we commit the right kind of budgets for that to happen. And so many other things have to happen. In other words, what COVID has done is to really lay bare the problems that we have. So my advice would be, as we seek to refine the findings from your research, there is also need to develop some kind of a strategic approach that is going to cut across the broad spectrum of our respective societies. So most times, you know, and I like the point that Elvis made earlier on about engaging the Ministry of Education, which is very important because they're responsible for driving policy. You can engage the Ministry of Youth and so forth. But it is also important that we, in our strategy, we engage parliaments. Parliaments are important because when it comes to the allocation of national resources, they have the pulse. And so to the extent that our lawmakers are able to understand the needs on the ground and are able to work with people in the executive, then they will not only be building the kind of budgets that will respond to the policy priorities that have been identified, they themselves will be part of the solution. The private sector is very important. Yesterday, somebody talked about the need to engage with mobile companies. A lot of them in Africa today, you know, MTN and so forth. As a matter of fact, some of those mobile telecommunication companies worked with many governments in the region to support the kind of to support education in the early part of COVID by providing resources that could actually reach you know, faraway communities. So we really need to build a broad-based constituency that has a developmental approach, because many of these issues are going to be addressed in the long term. There is an SDG regime in place. There is what we call Agenda 2063, which has commitments that member states have made. And in those commitments, if you read them carefully, there is a rights-based approach. Education should be seen as a social good. It's a public good. It's a, you know, young people have a right to education. And so what I'm saying, therefore, is that what COVID has done, it has not only brought the, we like to talk about existential threat when we talk about climate change, for instance, but the threat that we face now is real and present, and it's with us. And so we should seize the opportunity to really transform, you know, things. And transformation is not going to happen in a piecemeal way. It means that bringing everybody on board. So I thought I should emphasize that point. Lastly, on the point of mental health, which Akwasi mentioned, again, I would like to hear from our colleagues who are from government, but I think it's very key, you know, because apart from the deaths that have been recorded by COVID and all of that, we know that the isolation that many of us have faced over this period of time is going to have significant impact on our mental health. But of course, there were always mental health issues. And in Africa, unfortunately, there is stigma when it comes to dealing with that. And we have to overcome that. We have to overcome that. If we are saying that we leave no one behind as we move forward, we are going to build back better, it means that we are also going to take that issues that are non-traditional, issues that are taboo, that we don't normally talk about, to try to build it into our policy response moving forward. So I think it's a great point. There are countries now, Sierra Leone, for instance, is talking about a radical inclusion when it comes to education. Radical inclusion means, you know, bringing everybody on board. There is now a policy, for instance, in the past, when young girls became pregnant, you know, they leave school and they never come back to school. The government has now, you know, made it a policy that even when girls are pregnant, they can still go to school. That is part of the radical inclusion policy. People with disabilities, you know, to ensure that we do not only develop policies and laws that say, well, we have to accommodate them, but we create the facilities within the school so that they are able to access education. So I think what this means is it is really going to be a bottom-up approach, if you will, and that is going to start with the young people themselves, moving beyond the traditional things that we do and building that broad-based constituency. At the national level, at the regional level, the Africa Union provides a very big platform for young people. The Africa Peer Review Mechanism, for instance, has a youth program that brings young people together. You have to be able to use those instruments. You have to be able to use those institutions that are supposed to give a voice to young people to move forward. So let me stop there, and I'll be happy to come back in at some point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdul, for that. And I think it's very important that we leave no one behind as we continue working towards the development of strong communities, strong societies in our different contexts. So thank you very much for that. I think we'll go to Elvis, who will also comment on this particular question, and then we'll move from there. Elvis?
Thank you very much, Juliana. I can see Dr. Amin speaking with so much passion for young people, and I was about to ask Dr. Amin, we need to bring you back to youth and join the Youth Association. Okay, thank you very much, Akwesi Sapon from my actually country, Ghana. So on mental health, what the African Union has been doing so far is we want to raise awareness of mental health. So if you check, we've started a campaign, a mental health campaign, the African Union Youth Division. We've started a mental health campaign that we've titled it, How Are You Feeling? If you check on TikTok, if you check on Twitter, you can see that we've started a campaign with the hashtag, How Are You Feeling? Why are we starting with the campaign on How Are You Feeling? We want to raise awareness of mental health. The awareness creation leads to the policy development and the policy implementation. We had a survey. From the survey, we identified that a lot of the member states do not have national plans on mental health. Budget, even national budget or allocation to mental health is very, very minimal. 3%, 1%, that is not enough. But this is a condition, this is something that is affecting the development and growth of young people. We need to take this to the extra mile. So we started the awareness. We are just creating the awareness, and it goes to the next stage. We are on the 28th of October, this month, the 2nd of November, we are having a youth ministerial meeting, and these are some of the recommendations and suggestions that are going to be sent to the ministers. We've created an awareness campaign. This is what came out. You do not invest, your budget to mental health is very minimal. You do not have any national plan or action or strategy on mental health. How do we move forward? This is what young people are asking for. So my brother, Akwesi Sapon, since you've raised us, I'll be glad if you can join our campaign on How Are You Feeling? It's going on as I'm talking to you on Twitter and on TikTok. The African Union Youth Division campaign on How Are You Feeling is to raise awareness of mental health. And from there, we're able to submit the policy recommendations to member states. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elvis, for that response. And I think it's a call for everyone to start acting towards, mental health problems. So if you can also join the campaign, How Are You Feeling? And ensure that we all work towards accepting and appreciating the whole concept behind mental health and start solving that problem at hand. So thank you very much for that. And thank you, Akwasi, for that question. At this moment, we'll move to Falemara, who has a question. And Falemara is from Nigeria and is the team lead of the Nigeria Youth as a researcher team. Falemara.
Thank you very much, Juliana. Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask the question. Like you said, my name is Falemara Bajideshias from Nigeria. I am the team lead of Nigeria Youth as a researcher team. And our research focus our research study was focused on assessment of learning opportunities among youth in Nigeria during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, based on our research finding, it was revealed that a high percentage of the youths, like 35%, never accessed online learning, with just only 7% accessing it online learning on a daily basis. And this was as a result of some identified practical barriers, which include unreliable electricity, internet connectivity, unaffordability of data, inaccessibility to digital devices like laptops, mobile phones, smartphones, and the rest, and lack of digital knowledge. In view of this, one of our recommendations is to elaborate targeted policies towards fixing these challenges. So my question therefore is, do we have policies on ground or national action plans on ground to address this particular challenge? And if not, if you don't have these policies on ground, are there concrete policies or legal framework that can be institutionalized or translated into action plan to address these challenges? That's my first question. I don't know if I can go ahead to ask the other two questions.
I think you can just ask your questions and then we'll have the panelists address them.
Okay, the second question goes thus. Based on our research finding also, 75% of youth in Nigeria do not have sufficient institutional provisions for online learning. And this, we believe, affected the access to online learning. We therefore suggested that the government should dedicate funding to institutionalize accessible and inclusive online learning. So how can this be achieved? Now, the third question, which is the last question, is in view of some of the identified barriers I mentioned earlier on, I'd like to ask, how can equitable access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable electricity, as well as affordable internet connectivity?
I think Falamara dropped off the call. However, I think the panelists heard some of the questions, so we can go ahead and have them address this particular question. We'll start off with PT. Hello, is that Falamara?
Yeah, sorry, issues with my network, which is part of the challenges we are talking about. Sorry, let me conclude the third question. I said, how can equitable access to affordable, reliable, sustainable electricity, as well as affordable internet connectivity be ensured in bridging the gap of online learning opportunities between the rural and urban dwellers? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. So I'll ask PT Ndlovu if you'd like to touch on this question, and then we'll move to the other panelists.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you for the research that was conducted and for your recommendations. As I mentioned earlier, for instance, we could learn from Zambia, whereby we have taken it as a policy to have ICT in all schools, meaning all infrastructures should at some point have ICT facilities that will enable learners to have access to online learning and facilities. So that's one of the things that we've been implementing. And also Dr. Also mentioned about using television, radio stations and the like. So as Zambia, it's one of the policies through the COVID that we've implemented. We had lessons on national TV with different timing zones to be able to address the different school ranges, school grades and the like. So that could also help. Maybe as we're trying to bring forth these recommendations, we could lobby through our ministries of education, through our members of parliament, those that pass the national budgets also, so that maybe we could increase on funding to these institutions that create ICT facilities available, more funding to the energy sector, so that we don't have a discrepancy in the provision of energy in both the rural and urban areas. So mostly, as we bring forth our recommendations, we could also put them in forms of concept notes we submit to various government institutions. Also, like for instance, when the governments are implementing or developing policies, for instance, the national youth policies, we usually, as a country, engage the young people. We bring them in one forum, and this time we're trying to revise the national policy and would want to even go it live, so that as many people as possible, as many young people could give us submissions, so that these policies are theirs and not ours. So even the issue of mental health, I'm glad that it has been brought out. It's also a problem in our country, and we are at a stage whereby we're about to revise our national youth plan, and that will be one of the key issues that we address, and the many other issues that we've learned arising from the COVID pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contributions. Is there any other panelists who would also like to comment on this?
I would like to come in at this point. Babajide, I thank you for the study and the research. We do have policy for ICT development in Nigeria. And all schools, I would say almost all the schools in the urban and the city have ICT laboratories and some form of computer labs and facilities. From last year's evaluation, we discovered that even when these things are available, we still have the constraint of electricity. So the question is, how can we have affordable electricity to power these facilities so that students can access it? In all the institutions, we have ICT centers with functional internet facility. But the major problem, like I said, is electricity. So if the area of rural electricity is taken care of, I think it would be good to go in Nigeria here. Another thing I want to point out or bring to your notice is that the government, looking at the problem of electricity, have started installing solar stations, small solar stations with transformers. I have visited some schools personally that have these facilities, though they are not many, and some of them, they are still training the manpower to operate and make sure that there is constant power supply in the colleges so that the students can have access. So these are the things that the country has put in place, but I believe we still don't have enough to go around, but we are making progress. So if there is a national policy in place and the Ministry of Science and Tech, which is working hard to see that the things like ICT, information technology, is accessible to every student in the Federation. If they are able to implement this, then there will be no problem. So, but however, like I said, the situation is still depending on funds. And I believe if the young people will team up, come up with a policy of their own and present and make this presentation to the government, I think they will see the need to do more in that area. And in no distant time, I believe, we will have digital classrooms in place, even in the rural areas.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ngozika, for that. And I think that's a very important point to note, and to also learn that it's also happening in Nigeria. I think this can be a case study for other countries to start implementing policies and even other developmental issues that can help promote education in the different countries across Africa. So thank you very much for that. I'll also open this to Elvis, if you have anything to comment on this, and then we'll move on to Dr. Abdul. All right, Dr. Abdul, would you like to comment on this too?
Well, just to emphasize the point we made earlier on about, I think, to have a developmental approach, because this issue of access to energy keeps coming, and my colleague in Nigeria just said it again, and I can confirm what she said, that there is quite a lot of efforts being made in the region to try to address the energy issue, but it's a major constraint that we will have to deal with. My colleague in Zambia was talking about the involvement of young people in the development of national youth policies. I should mention that this is really part of our methodology. UNESCO, part of the work that we do in supporting governments is to essentially work with them to develop and review national youth policies. And I should mention that the current policy now that Zambia is implementing was actually developed with our support back in 2012, 2013. So I'm happy to hear that that policy is due for review, and we would be happy, to work with the government of Zambia and bring more young people into that, because this is the only way that we're going to have young voices. But I think we need to also emphasize, that much as it is important to develop those policies, implementing them and making the commitments are really, really very important. So, I think that's what I can say for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I guess the issue of development is very important, and just collaborating as we work towards one cause. So at this moment, I'll give the platform to Max, who will ask one last question, and then we'll conclude this particular discussion. So Max, you can take the floor, and please just keep it short and brief.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I have to come back again. This is part of our review process for the publication of the policy brief, so bear with me. My other question is that is benchmarked on the previous deliberations and the problems I stated, or the findings I stated. And these are just the policy recommendations. So we are just trying to clear things around it to make sure that by the time it's published, things are a bit feasible, for implementation. So because of the constraints surrounding the online learning, and it is increasingly becoming clear that in-person class needs to get back on board as one of the short strategies. And for that to happen, one of the ways at the moment, which are in that space, is vaccination of both the teachers and the students. That's one of the solutions we suggested, that students and the teachers be prioritized in the vaccination process, so that the in-person classes can resume, so that we close this divide which is existing between the urban and the rural setting, and of course all the other constraints surrounding online classes. However, there is another emerging problem, that the vaccines are either inaccessible or they are not affordable to some African countries. I'm speaking in the African continent because that's our focus. So, and some of the reasons why the vaccines are not inaccessible, because they were already purchased by the developed countries in a way. And of course, some countries have actually the money to purchase, but because of the things surrounding the purchasing of the vaccines has become a constraint for them to get it. So now the countries are relying more on donations from these other countries, which will not make it massive vaccination, and it will almost take forever to cover the millions of people we have in the continent or in individual countries. So I was wondering, how can this challenge be addressed to make sure that vaccines can trickle in African countries, especially those who can be able to afford to buy it, have them, and also to reduce on this dependence more on only the importation on the donation of this. So, and lastly, we're also suggesting that Ministry of Education to develop, if the online classes continue, Ministries of Education should develop a learning framework that guide the online classes, because it doesn't exist. So everyone just comes up with the way they want to do it, how they want to do it, where they want to do it from, without any standardization, because we believe the framework can help to provide a systematic and a uniform way of delivering these lessons for the time being, or if it continues as the hybrid. So I was wondering, how feasible is it for us to have a framework, or the governments in African countries to have a framework that can streamline strictly online learning, so that we have a systematic way of doing these things. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Max. And I think one of the panelists can just jump right in and tackle this question.
Yes, can I come in?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much to Max and his team for raising the issue of vaccines as part of your recommendation. I think it speaks to the fact that as you embarked on this effort, you were very practical in looking at the current environment and ensuring that you do not only develop recommendations that speak to online learning, but really dealing with the current situation. I think it is very true, and we don't need to belabor the point that there is a lot of inequality in terms of access to the vaccines. In this part of the world, in Europe and the United States, many citizens have access to vaccines. Unfortunately, in Africa and in other regions of the world, less than 2% of the population have been vaccinated. And so as we talk about global solidarity, and as we talk about the fact that if COVID is not defeated in every part of the world, nobody is safe. You know, there's always this saying that if all of us are not safe, then it makes no sense to favor one group over the other. So it's very important that you really focus on the vaccine situation and came up with very concrete recommendation when it comes to rolling out the vaccines in African countries. I think very early on, when the vaccines were developed, many countries were prioritizing what they call frontline workers. And I would agree with you that teachers really should be put in that category when governments, much as there is a lot of challenge in accessing the vaccine for reasons we cannot get into, we just don't have the time to debate that. But as governments respond to the pandemic and begin to vaccinating their population, teachers should be prioritized, definitely, because without that, we are not going to have the kind of face-to-face contact that unfortunately, it's not unfortunate, but we're going to have to go back to that if we are going to transition to online learning. Online education is not going to, is the future, but it's not immediate. So somehow we have to get people back to school. And that means we need to vaccinate teachers. They should be considered a priority. So this is something I think you should really push. And as you engage on the ground, I was making the point about building a broad-based constituency to advocate for these policies. You are not going to only engage governments and parliaments and so forth. There are also development partners on the ground that are working to support governments in respective countries. So I would imagine when you engage them, those partners on the ground, whether they are UN entities, whether they are bilateral partners, this should be, an argument that should be advanced, in a way also to raise the issue around inequalities when it comes to vaccine access in Africa. The other recommendation on a framework for online learning as we develop, yes, you're quite right. Actually, one of the programs that UNESCO pushes quite a lot is, you know, even before the pandemic, we've always pushed for ICT in education, and I know that in our education sector, in our communication and information sector, there's a lot of work that has been done over the years to try to ensure that information and communications technology is part of the education landscape, and so. To the extent that you have zeroed in on that recommendation, I think this is something that really needs to be flagged. So the argument should be that governments should invest, you know, in ICTs in the education sector, but to also ensure that there is a framework so that it's not all over the place. You know, I mentioned earlier on that ICBA, our Institute for Capacity Building in Africa, which works primarily on teacher education, had already started building an online platform. I'm sure that ICBA and other entities within UNESCO and other UN agencies will be very much open to working with governments to ensure that we are able to build that framework that is necessary. And lastly, I should mention, you know, Madam Moderator, if you allow me, I think it will be remiss in this conversation if we don't, you know, highlight the plight of young people who are not in the education sector. I mean, you know, it's a fact that Africa has the youngest population globally, and we know all the arguments about demographic dividends and so forth, and the threats that this huge youth population poses if we don't address their needs. Unfortunately, the vast majority of those young people are not in the education sector. So the question becomes, as you reflect on your research and seeking to advance this, how do we address the needs of young people who are not in the formal, you know, education sector? This is where you probably may want to link your findings in the education realm with the work that was done by the Central Africa team, where they were talking about entrepreneurship, you know, and skills development. Because most of the time, the young people who either have dropped out of school or don't have access to education are the people who are engaged in, you know, small scale business entities. So as we think about COVID moving forward, what kind of policy responses do we need to put in place to ensure that we respond to the needs of those young people as well? Because if we are going to educate those who are in school already and build their capacity and leave the vast majority behind, there is a threat to long-term stability in the region. So I think as you reflect on that, it will be key. I know when you're doing research, of course, you can't go all over the place, you know, you have to limit the scope of what you do, but sometimes also you can flag issues, you know, that can be picked up moving forward. And I think the plight of young people who are not in the education sector, how do we ensure that we, you know, they have access to some kind of skills training? There are lots of countries that have TVET programs, you know, technical, vocational, and education training programs. But the extent to which those programs are able to reach the vast majority of young people who are out there, is an issue that I think should be reflected on. So let me stop there, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdul, for that presentation and all the deliberations that you've made on this particular question. And due to our time, we can no longer go to all the other panelists, but I just want to say thank you so much to all our panelists, from Elvis, Miss Ngozi, And Piti and Dr. Abdul, thank you so much for sharing your contributions. And of course, to the young people who were part of this discussion, this would never have been a fruitful discussion without your contributions. So thank you so much for being part of this discussion. And we look forward to more engagement. So remember to engage, leave no one behind, and continuously transform the systems that are there to ensure that we meet the different contexts that we're in. So from the UNESCO team, this is a goodbye. Thank you.